as things degrade and as things get worse, I believe things will collapse. I believe there is a collapse inevitably incoming if we maintain our current systems, because the machine has begun to lie to itself. As we've seen here, a lot of the science and research that comes out is an assumption, both an assumption, both an assumption.
Yeah.
And as that continuously gets battered by the waves of reality, that will just crumble into nothing, because it's just lies. It's lies upon lies.
They've had to get more
And
and more
that
intense in their strategy over time, and there's
yeah.
only so much intensity they can get before they just run out of ways to
Well,
do it.
well, it's not only they're being more intense; they're being more intense in support of a lie,
Yeah.
and they're building further lies on top of that lie. That's really where a lot of leftist pressure stuff. That's why it's so dangerous. It's not dangerous just because I don't believe in it. It's dangerous because it's not compatible with reality.
Mm.
It's just, that's always been my main contention. It's just like, look, if communism, socialism, if enforced racial equality was possible and was demonstrably impossible, I wouldn't be against it, because on if you can create a quote unquote ideal meritocratic society, it'd be great. But you can't, because people are different and groups of people are different and they have different motivations. And there must be a force that has primacy. If you look at culture, if you look at, the reason that countries prioritize their own citizens and citizens who are of the majority ethnicity of that country is because that's the best way to keep the place working. If you
Mm.
don't prioritize the majority, if you don't enfranchise them, don't really genuinely, even if it's kind of a revealed versus stated preference thing, if you are not being a custodian towards actual kind of perpetuating, not even just like improvement, but like perpetuating the kind of state of your society, then it's going to collapse. Like but people, I think, I know I'm rambling a bit here. People think that I have this overarching idea that there's this giant conspiracy, that there's all these people up there. But my contention has always just been this: that if you have bad people in charge, then bad things will happen. But if you have good people in charge, then good things will happen. It's very simplistic. I know it's a crayon drawing, but that really is the contention, that power isn't wielded by systems, it isn't wielded by abstract concepts. Power is wielded by people. And if the people who wield power are evil, then the outcomes are evil no matter what you call your system.
I think when you say ideal meritocracy, you may be talking about a system that pays attention only to something like a productivity-based metric.
Yes, that's what I mean.
With regards to nothing else. I'm not advocating for that. There's maybe a reason you interpreted it as more social Darwinistic than I thought of it as anyway. Meritocracy, and perhaps this is an example of what you're saying about people having different definitions. I don't mean an absolute one. More so, I mean relative to the failure that we have today of a corrupted, formally meritocratic system. A healthy economy is what I'm after, which is what's missing today from that is some meritocracy. But I don't want to go too far with that. We don't want to go full on social Darwinism where, well, that orphan wasn't strong enough to survive. Dead, no compassion, no salvation, nothing whatsoever. Some people in chat might like that, but we don't need to go that far with it. We basically have the right answers to how to run a society already, and this doesn't fully define it, as Scrump is saying. There's different definitions, but a classically liberal, capitalistic democracy is the broad category in which the correct answers for how to run a modern society, a European-derived society, lie. It's always going to be some variation of within that, I think, for the time being. And what we have today, the problems are present exactly where those pillars have been eroded.
The problem is that people have very different definitions of what democracy is as well. The problem is that the West as a broad entity is broken down in trying to argue about what those things mean. I think one of the problems of democracy is the fact that really you just end up with a lot of unnecessary tinkering. And whereas a feedback mechanism is necessary, there are a lot of what you're saying in terms of meritocracy, everyone would agree with, is just how you run a society is really simple. and I know it's easy to say that, but it is. It's just that, look, if people work hard and are conscientious, they should be rewarded for it. It really is that simple. But how you
Yeah,
do
exactly.
that and how you maintain that in place, because the problem with what you're saying is that the West has been ostensibly run like that since the end of the Second World War, and it hasn't worked.
I think it's difficult to make that claim. There's a lot of objective metrics by which it's worked exponentially better than any society in history. But there are risks of having a new paradigm like we've had for the last couple of hundred years because of all this new technology. The risk is things moving too fast and some certain things getting ahead of other things, especially with the internet re-amplifying everything. It's no wonder we're getting a lot of unrest right now, especially with all of culture moving onto the internet. Not just information flow, not just academic information flow, but culture, the entirety of culture moving onto the internet. It's a surprise it's not worse than it is, really. But the solution, as you say, is not that complicated. And the problems with our society are very simplistic failures to comprehend things pretty much everyone would actually agree with. Very simplistic failures to complement and implement those things, hidden behind layers upon layers of expensive propaganda. Expensive and very carefully crafted propaganda.
You can undercut the immigration debate by just saying, look, if you run Britain to the desires of the British public, the desires of the British public has always been for very minimal immigration. If you have very minimal immigration, then Britain will be a racially homogenous society, a culturally homogenous society that changes relatively slowly. That is what most people want. But what most people want hasn't been implemented. And it hasn't been implemented while those people have ostensibly had democracy.
I wouldn't say that because there's a lot of views which are majority favored, which I don't think should necessarily be implemented. And even then, I don't think that democracy should be a mere I don't think it should be direct democracy, a mere flowing from the people to the policy. I think there should be intermediate steps of a separate kind of class, an aristocracy. It's always formed in human history. They always get corrupt, but they don't have to be, and they have a different perspective on things. And mainly the reason for this is that most new ideas are bad, but if we stopped having new ideas, we'd never get anywhere. And the only way to test the new ideas that make it through the layers of theoretical criticism is the deep empiricism of actually trying them in practice. That's always got to happen, and it's a really messy and dirty process, and the public usually don't want it, as you say, but it has, I think, always has to happen. And that's why you need to have usually a layer between the public and the policy direct. It should be very strongly influenced by the public, but it is still a pressure valve between these two groups on the the glut of social quote-unquote innovations that the upper class wants to try and get the most out of, and the public who just want to fucking grill.
Then that layer becomes decisionary. You're describing the self-destructive nature there. You end up any layer that is decisionary has sovereignty, and therefore you don't have democracy. The power cannot actually be vested in the hands of the people. You can't have diffuse sovereignty. It doesn't exist because of the division of labor.
You can if you have any sort of invader to the class, because it doesn't always have to be specifically that class. You can get people who, because this is Orwell's conception, because there's another class in the middle class. And he's not just talking about economic middle class, though it sometimes aligns with that. He's talking also about social, political middle class. Well, you can get middle class rising through the annals of politics, granted much slower in the UK than, say, in the US, but you can get it happening. A new influence finding its way into modern politics and replacing the previous upper class. And again, it's not a pretty pattern, but it's the one we've got. It's the one that evolution seems to have selected for. And I do think that allowing the people to choose their leader does in fact grant them sovereignty, but not too much.
Well, like I said, the middle class did basically march through the British state in the 1910s. That's what the whole liberal reforms was. And now we have like weird global communism and euthanasia. It unfortunately one has led to the other.
The degenerated remains of a movement that may have introduced a lot of good things. I mean, the 20th century was, despite all its horrors, a time of great development and improvement, especially of technology and by that nature of everything about our life circumstances, despite the horrors. But the horrors are now what we're dealing with, the consequences of the things we learned that are evil.
No, you are categorically wrong.
Okay.
You think it's better. That is a value analysis. That is an
Mm.
individual value analysis. The idea that the world is objectively better is wrong. It is not objectively better. It depends what your idea of better is. And if
Yes,
your if
which is
your
when I
idea of
say
better is the fact that we have Deliveroo food now, but we
no,
also have
not exactly.
euthanasia, I think that I would probably, and many people would give up a large amount of our modern technology to have certain aspects of our social
I
ills,
understand what you're saying.
like the utter destruction of the British demographic, reversed.
I understand what you're saying.
I don't think my Nintendo Switch is worth
No, I know.
the fact
You have misunderstood
that
my position.
40% of people in Britain now have one parent outside. All like 40% of British babies, one parent is outside the UK.
Yeah, you have misunderstood
And
my
the
position.
problem is, no, I don't
No,
misunderstand your position. You're just
I,
wrong.
I
No,
think I
you
know
are
what you're.
making
No, no,
you are
you have
making a
misunderstood. I
value. You're
know
making a value analysis.
I
It is
didn't say
not
that.
a
I
value
didn't say.
analysis.
I didn't say. If I said objective, I didn't mean it the way you think I meant it. Objective, I mean literally two certain objectives, and we're not talking about delivery services. We're talking about
Well,
life expectancy. We're talking about availability of food. We're talking about reduction of world poverty. We're talking about availability of technology and emancipation of information and solving diseases. All these things, these are objectives to which we have clearly got better. And there are many problems as well. And
in many
these
cases, we
problems are likely
haven't.
to be a direct response to the massive fluctuation in changes that have happened during this time. You are always going to get a lot of changes in both directions when the environment changes a lot, because a species will fluctuate randomly. And you're always going to get a lot of people trying to take advantage of the edges of that. I would expect things to get worse a lot quicker than they are, given that we have the internet changing things so quickly. We're adapting relatively well to it, despite all the bad things. I'm not trying to be all monotonic progression of history, but we have seen by a lot of metrics that people do genuinely care about massive improvements in the 20th century, as well as many horrors that come as a concomitant part of that. But that is the progress through the universe. That is life. You get both. You have to optimize how you use them.
The problem is that from many metrics and the way we're heading, there has been a very large process of societal decline. Crime, for example, I did a stream about that. Crime in 1900 was genuinely, I think, 10 times lower in Britain, especially violent crime, was almost unheard of in late Victorian Britain. It's why the public was so obsessed with it. When I looked at the progression of crime and the changes in crime in Britain, I was alarmed because you can't say that the Victorians were ever bad at measuring things. They loved it. They were obsessed with it. It's all they had to do. They loved measuring things. And we live in a world now where we live in what most people would consider a criminal dystopia. We live in a society where crime is epidemic compared to where it used to be. It is insane, the degradation in people's public safety in the West over the last 100 years. It is also undeniable that we have become less safe as individuals and become much more likely to be victims of crime. Our property is a lot less safe, and our rights in terms of property rights as individuals are far less enforced. Through a lot of the research I do, if you look into a lot of these claims about the 20th century and the 21st century, they're just wrong. A lot of people have just been lied to about the fact that things have improved. On the kind of the side of public safety and the side of kind of protection of people's property, you can very, very clearly say that things have not only got worse, they have got exponentially worse by a factor of 10, provably so. I think that a lot of what we think about of the progress of the 20th century is what has been told to us rather than what we see, because we weren't alive at the beginning of it. If you look at the metrics that count, if you look at the affordability of even certain goods, they've got a lot worse over the last 50 years, especially. If you look at people's access to housing, if you look at wages compared to house prices, I think the idea that there has been this improvement under democracy is a lie. If you want to create a causal relationship, you could make a very good argument that democracy is crime.
I don't think we disagree on this stuff. As I said, there are downsides as well to all this. The upsides are the ones that are likely to be kept into the future, and the downsides are the ones that we'll deal with. The the changes in the last 100 years have been a time of a greater speed of change than any 100 years preceding it by huge orders of magnitude. Perhaps the exact orders that you're talking about.
Not true either. Look, if you think about Britain in
the changes that you just described are part of it.
I was going to say yes, but that's degradation. In terms of technology
That's not all that's
stops
happened.
changing. Because people think about the 20th century and the 21st century, great technological explosions, but really our technology has begun to stagnate in quite an alarming way. It's the way I think about it like this. Think about the difference between 1900 and 1950, and the difference between 1950 and 2000. I'd say the difference between 1900 and 1950 is massive. It is a lot bigger than the difference between 1950 and the year 2000. And it's kind of got even bigger than that. Think of the difference between 1975 and the year 2000, and say the year 2000 and now. Things have stagnated in many ways. It's people don't think about that a lot, but it is true that really,
I don't think
culturally
it's
and
stagnation.
even technologically,
I don't think it's stagnation. I think it's the movement in a lot of areas. It's this is maybe what you're identifying, the movement from a large number of new ideas to a small number of ideas which are the ones that worked, which is a selection process which is quite natural when something very new is happening. Information technology and technology in general, technology of the digital kind especially, are a relatively new phenomenon, new as of the 20th century, almost in the way I'm talking about, of the 20th century. And so you will start with a lot of new ideas, but then a lot of them don't really fit into society very well. A lot of them get cancelled out and removed. And then you've got these devices, these little PDA devices that we call phones, which can do almost everything related to information, which could have been 50 devices a few decades ago. That may be what you're identifying as a reduction in innovation, but I don't think innovation itself is reducing. And if it is, it's to the exact extent that we see this degradation of meritocracy that we talk about here for these politics topics.
Well, that's why I was about to actually come around and agree with you and say, look, it doesn't matter what you call it, but what's happened is we have stopped incentivizing great men. We've stopped incentivizing people with vision. We've stopped incentivizing people who have this kind of intangible human quality to imagine something that then changes the world. It is something that is sorely missing from our world right now. There are very few visible men of vision to act on that vision because they're seen as a threat.
I think you're right, and I think that is one of the things that we talk about here. Perhaps that's been going on for too long. But you've also got the argument of things start off as a realm for pioneers, much like the internet culturally, much like the US, but then they gradually begin to become formulaic, because formulas are discovered which work better, which optimize, which create a more competitive system. And then they begin to corporatize, you get the normies moving in, and it becomes very brittle and very sluggish. And so what's the solution to that? New pioneers into a new way of doing things, but that has to become much better than the old formulas before it gets adopted. And that's the slow progress that we're making now in politics to present something not only that is better, but is massively better enough that we can effortlessly win. And I think we are getting there. We're seeing the beginnings of that actually happening, but it does take a long time. And it's the same thing with everything. That process happens with everything.
I think the problem is that politics hasn't got better. And politics never gets better, in my opinion. I don't think politics improves at all because the human condition doesn't change. And politics has to reckon with the human condition. And a lot of the politics of the 21st century has been a denialism about the human condition. Specifically, a lot of equality and equity politics is just denial of the human condition.
Yeah, as I said before, it's new ideas. Most new ideas are bad, but we have to kind of try them. And the 20th century has been the century of that kind of idea, that kind of lifting off of nature and seeing what we can do up here. And I think there probably have been other times in history where that's happened, perhaps not to the same extent, but again, perhaps that's part of that random fluctuation of the massive changes of the 20th century.
I think that to go on a different point, that you would. I think leftists in general are a lot more black-pilled than people on the right are in many cases. I think if you look in leftist communities, especially traditional left, old left communities, those people are so much more miserable than people like us are. And it's because they won. It's because they won and it didn't work. And it's kind of been interesting watching them deal with that. It's been interesting watching the left win and win so hard that they become unopposed, and them having to deal with the fact that they hate the world that they've created. They hate it. I think they hate it even more than we do, because we know that this is not the world that we want. We know that our ideas don't have primacy. We know that we are the dissidents in a certain sense, but they don't have that. They are, they are the man, and they hate being the man.
There may be some
It's
that are
kind of
like
what
that,
some of
yeah.
this stuff is about. Yeah,
I haven't
it's
seen
like
that.
it's why they're having to rebrand stuff.
Yeah, I haven't actually seen that, but you might be right. Yeah.
The problem is it's really difficult because a lot of leftist communities are like almost like black boxes.
Yeah.
But I know we have the leftist own stuff, but it's really hard to get an idea as somebody who's not part of them what is actually going on day to day in discussions between leftist activists in private. It is something that we do not see very often. It's something I've been a little bit privy to. And I think really as little as some certain people have on the right, I think that there is, especially at the top of the tree, a complete like lack of faith. If you think we're black pilled, I think the problem that we're seeing actually is that the global elite are even more black pilled than we are.
I mean, half of them are trying to remove the human race, aren't they? But I'm not sure what their motive for that is. I'm not sure if it's that they're black pilled.
I think a lot. I think a lot of them have just given up on humanity and given up on the idea of humanity. I think that the problem is that we, as you've talked about, we do live almost in like a post everything society. Almost everything that people can think of has been tried and expanded upon. In fact, what we're finding is we're having a dearth of people like thinking of new things. You spoke about what you were talking about earlier. I didn't want to diminishing returns. There are diminishing returns in every field of technology. But the amazing thing about the 19th century and the earlier 20th is that people were continuously discovering and inventing new fields of technology. And the only thing is you all you ever see is the car park. You don't see the forest that was there. And in the same way, all you ever see the empty ground. You don't see the house that you don't actually see the house that could be there. And causality is difficult because it's very hard to say we lived in a different system if different fields of science would be invented or not. Are we genuinely reaching the end of human technology, or are we stagnating because we have run out of ideas and we can no longer pursue new fields of human technology? I don't know. It's impossible to know because the nature of reality, things about trend analysis like this, it's because it's unknowable in many ways.
I think technology is one area that we're not stagnating in. In culturally, socially, politically, we're going fucking backwards right now. And you could argue we were stagnating in the 90s and noughties, but I don't think technology has been stagnating. One example I would give for this is the sudden appearance of AI as a technology that's erasing most fields, or potentially beginning to erase most industries. But other than that, it's largely because a lot of the stuff that we can do, a lot of the stuff that would have been innovation that you can physically see, as people were talking about, like the invention of powered flight and all this stuff, is now a lot of that innovation is in the digital realm, where you can't physically see it as well, but it's still innovation, and it's still very important innovation. And since roughly the 90s, innovation has been more in information technology. Maybe because it's easier, but also maybe because it's just there's so many opportunities there for innovation that are being taken up, more so than in the physical realm. But the 20th century was a great time for physical realm innovation. But like that stuff has been sort of, we've capitalized on those opportunities now, and we've found the formulas that work. And there probably will be more in the future, but maybe it was just an unlock of a few key technologies in the 1800s that made it all possible. And then the need to do it, what with the wars and all that. Similarly, the decline in the late 20th century may not be due primarily on any large scale to rot internally. The rot may have been precipitated by deliberate attacks from world opponents. So I wouldn't be as self-blaming. I would still have faith that the people that built these nations are essentially the spirit of them is still there, and we're going to need to see a resurgence of it in the public interest right now.
Yeah, I'd agree with you in that problem is it's a lot of what we have now is technology for technology's sake. A lot of what we had in the past was problem solving, and I believe that we've banned people from problem solving in many ways. We prevented people from identifying a problem and having the ability to solve it themselves in many cases, because so much stuff has been taken out of many people's hands by the expansion of the size of the state. It sounds a bit kind of ANCAP, but it's true. It's very much like Ted Kaczynski talked about. People get learned helplessness when you remove certain aspects of their lives from their control. They stop being able to do them, and I think that's probably part of the picture. A lot of it really is quite simple, in that it's like really simple truth. Or it's like if you constantly do things for people, they won't be able to do it themselves. And it's the problem with political theory is it's writing a 300-page essay to talk about something that could really just be expressed in a sentence if you're talking to somebody who's willing to understand you properly.
Yeah, and of course that's where the difference comes with ambiguity and wanting to be specific about everything. Something we talked about earlier with the meanings of those words being different. So I can understand being specific about that. But yes, ultimately a lot of these problems are simple to solve. But if we just created a simple platform and people just existed on that platform and didn't try new things, I think that would be stagnation. And I have found that the universe abhors stagnation more than corruption and will use corruption to break stagnation, which I think is what we're seeing now. On Scrump's point, if the politics of the 20th/21st century were spent denying the human condition, what line of politics exist that we can use to embody and encourage the human condition? Would such politics even be desirable? Well, I think the sort of decay of like the 100 years of decay perspective, as I would call it, there's some truth to it, but every decay, especially of a species that has been going for so long, is very likely to be, and I'm seeing very much the indications that it's happening, followed by a rejuvenation. And that you don't just get strength to strength to strength to strength every time. You may get a partial collapse or a melting of parts of the system so that a new part can rise up. And under the iron boot of your opponents, you get stronger, more strong than you would if there was no iron boot, to the point that you can then push it off you, which I am seeing the beginnings of that happening now. So the movement that we have here, the movement that we're broadly a part of, already has a lot of the right answers, already has a lot of the right ideas that you need for the 21st century beyond where we are now. And it may just be that everything that we are lacking today in society on a broad level, all those important things, many of the things that Scrump just mentioned, with the great men and with real masculinity, with perhaps more varied technological inventions and all that stuff. Those may be the.
I will say the great men can also be women.
Sure.
Sure. As a joke, but a lot of people get autistic about that. About excuse me, it's her story. It's not he. It's
that's not autism.
I'm using that in a general.
That's something else, I think.
I'm just kidding there. I will say yes. Some of my political stuff is a bit left field. That and I the thing is, I would never go out and say that your position is entirely wrong, because it isn't. There does need to be an interplay between these two different kind of these disparate positions of where people are, what people want to try, and the synthesis people want to make. Because a lot of people, as we found, really are talking at cross purposes. They're saying the same thing in different terms and then arguing about the semantics about it, and that frustrates me.
Yeah, so a lot of arguments are axiomatic. Yeah.
That's why I try and boil my ideas down and be like, look,
sure.
All I want is what the priority right now is getting people in charge who aren't like actual child eating.
Yeah, that would be nice, wouldn't it?
That sounds like the stuff, but we have so much evidence of it. It's so undeniable. It's just like, well, I guess they are. That should be people's primary focus, really. I think people get too autistic about the shape of things to come. And I think really, if you have a group of conscientious who genuinely have their own people's best interest in heart and can actually communicate and compromise with each other, and that will be infinitely better than any group of like degraded, corrupt elites we have now. If we can have actual proper people doing decision making, things do get. It's kind of like the good king and the bad king. People argue about the shape of politics, but really it's just, do you have a good leader? Do you have a bad leader? And you kind of have to go from there. A lot of people kind of shout at me because it is a simplistic. to say, but it is broadly true. It is
Yeah.
just, it is at the end of the day about the people.
It's good to get a grip on the fundamentals, the basic stuff, as you said, because for axiomatic reasons. But something I can say that is encouraging is I think it's very expensive to suppress the truth. It's very expensive to suppress from positions of power those worthy of being there. And so our opponent is generally at a disadvantage.
It's another thing. Before I go, is one of the things I found. Spend so many resources doing that. That's where all the resources are going. The resources are going like keeping a lid on the layer below them. And like I said, a lot of the degradation that we see is the fact that a huge amount of the elite's bandwidth, if you will, is spent simply trying to hold the pot on the pressure cooker.
That cannot last.
It's like a comical thing. The lid's rattling.
Exactly.
Balance, but it's still last. Just about on. It cannot last. Anyway, thank you guys for having me and doing.
Yeah, thank you for joining, Scrump. I don't want you to have the impression that because we argued and disagreed that I didn't enjoy the conversation. In fact, I want to have this conversation as much as possible because you and I have different opinions and have both thought it through.
It's so annoying that people can't have these discussions, that people can't genuinely have a debate and then not get huffy about it. Because these, at the moment, are irreconcilable issues. They're not issues with an easy answer. These are very hard conversations and nobody really has a solid grip on them because we're in such a period of flux right now. And to tell somebody that they can't have an honest discussion like that, and then, I hate to be, this is what's wrong with our politics, but this is what's wrong with our politics, that people can't sit down and go, right, how the hell do we fix this mess? Because it's a real big one. Do we have a big enough mob? Anyway, thank you guys and good night.
See you soon, Scrump.